Welcome to Tech Startup Stories, hosted by Natalie Binns. This is the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the B2B startup world.
Hi, I'm Natalie Binns, and I'm the host of Tech Startup Stories. This podcast is really designed to share the unique and challenging journeys of all the people that are building small startups to scale-ups in the tech space. My background? Initially, I was in sales, and then I moved into marketing, and I've been lucky enough to work with some amazing tech companies. But my passion is really startups. And that led me back to helping tech startups set up their marketing and go-to-market functions where the budgets are tight and the resources are few and far between. So let's get into this week's podcast.
Hi, everyone. This week, I am speaking with James Hill from Flexys. Welcome to the show, James.
Nice to meet you, Natalie.
Great to meet you. The setup of your role and your experience with Flexys is different to most of our guests. So as most of our listeners know, most of the guests that we've spoken to so far and will continue to speak to are founders or co-founders of that business, and then, have kind of appointed themselves a CEO, or naturally that's been their position. But for you came into the business as COO, not as a founder, and as somebody with an extensive career in your industry, and have now kind of taken over that CEO position with John Hickman, the previous CEO and founder, stepping back. So I would love to know, tell me more about that journey and that experience.
Yeah, no problem. So, I guess the sort of potted history is that prior to Flexys, all the way back in time, there was another business called Talgentra that built a very similar product, albeit not as sort of modern and cutting edge as we have today, but built a debt management product. And our chairman was running that business, John and Brian, co-founders of Flexys. They were working in that business, and they scaled that, and then they exited and sold that to Experian back in 2007. And then after that, I think they all collectively, including the investors who were part of that business, wanted to do it again and saw the opportunity really with where the tech had got to be able to create something that truly was a differentiator in the market. And so that's why, 2016, December, they founded Flexys and registered it and off they went. And obviously having done it once, they were able to really quickly, get a product to market and get some clients. And it's really nice because we were talking about, where we are in the calendar year at the moment, but just before this, I was talking to one of our clients now, in fact, two of those clients who are our two earliest clients. They're the first two clients of Flex is still a client now. And with one of them, we're just about to embark on a really huge transformation project for their business. So that's such a nice story, I think, in terms of that client arc and where the business is today and where those clients are. And so Flexys was scaling away and growing and bigger clients. And I was running a really large global professional services organization. So I was sort of in that sort of ops execution role in a big PLC. And someone who I knew really well said to me, I'm working for this business. I think you'd be great to come and help us with our scaling challenges around ops and services and support and everything we need to do to be able to serve these clients and grow the business. And so, I joined Flexys then, came in as COO, as you say. And then really at that point, we were probably at the juncture where we were starting to look ahead at well, what do we do next? Where do we go? Like, what geographical markets do we look at? How do we take the business from a startup, through scale up to a business, and into a profitable business and everything else. And so we spent a lot of time, I guess, as a board working on those sort of scale up plans and almost going from, the vision of where you want it to be and as the sort of, you're going to be the global leader in your sector, And everyone's got the same vision, I guess, but and everyone has the same problem, which is that you're competing with enormous PLCs with hundreds of millions of pounds worth of budgets. So it's not very easy to become a global leader overnight. Um, but how do you even just grow from 8 clients to 20 clients to 30 clients to 60 clients? How do you do that? Because vision is great and it fuels a business, particularly in the early days, right? But you get to a point where teams and people need something tangible, like how do we go this year from here to here? And sometimes, numbers and P&L is not actually that tangible because people can't really influence it as much as they would like to. So we started to build a scale up plan. And at that point, we started to talk about, you know, where the business would go and what we needed to do. And so, I guess at that point, I sort of almost became, whilst I wasn't a founder, I sort of then became part of that group where we were going, well, okay, what are we going to do? And what's the shape of the business going to look like in 1, 2, 3 years? And so I guess that set the path then for me to really shape then that growth strategy with the co-founders of the business and the rest of the board, and then move into the CEO role in the September of the year that I joined.
That's quite a journey, and you've kind of talked a lot about the differences in going from being that startup into the sort of scale up mode that you're in at the moment. You mentioned a little bit about what you do. Why don't you tell us more? What is Flexys? What is it all about?
Yeah, of course. So, really simply, Flexis provide real-time end-to-end collection software. So for teams and organizations of all sizes. So anybody who lends or extends credit, whether that be B2B or B2C, will have some kind of debt collection function for arrears, for customers go into arrears. And this is, I guess, when we talk about debt collection, you think about your utility providers and your phone providers and your bank rather than debt collectors at the other end of the spectrum. So we provide them with the software really that automates and digitizes that whole process to allow them to scale, become more efficient, and provide customers with modern self-service channels. So yeah, we work across a whole range of sectors and different organizations.
And what sort of size companies does that go from? You've mentioned even B2C, right, to B2B. So
Yeah, so
who's your typical client?
the model is always it's always sell B2B, right? So it's either B2B to B or B2B to C. So yeah, some of our clients operate in a B2B market, others are B2C motor finance or personal loans and banking. Um, in terms of ICP, I think it's a really interesting question, because I think that for most startups and probably even scale ups, your ICP changes pretty wildly depending on how well you qualify stuff. I guess most early stage businesses don't qualify stuff very well. And sometimes they just deliberately don't qualify it, just chase after everything, which is a wildly dangerous strategy. But I would say that um, ICP for us typically are organizations who are on some kind of transformation. Now, it could be a digital transformation, it could be a customer experience led transformation. So you could have a COO or a chief customer officer driving some sort of change in a business. That's the more sort of traditional, your tier ones, tier twos, your sort of more traditional businesses. Equally, then challengers. So new credit card companies, new utilities, new lenders, new banks, anyone who's coming into the market. And I guess the interesting thing for us, and it's something we probably might talk about a little bit later, but every business probably has some kind of pivot, or some kind of adaptation at some point. And I guess our product was really built and did really, really well at the big end, like big scale, big volume, so big customer volume. Um, and what we realized, quite quickly is that sector is also really hard to sell to, particularly when you're a small business, and a scaling business. So the really interesting organizations that existed out there as well that we really liked and also had a big synergy with were some of the challenges. But often, if you're a challenger credit card company, as an example, you'll probably have quite a low volume of arrears because, fundamentally you're putting your capital into lending, but you're trying to manage that. Um, and even if it's running at 8 to 10% of your book, it's still quite a small number of customers. So can you justify moving from spreadsheets to effectively like an enterprise system? Maybe, maybe not. And great ROI from a product perspective, but sometimes, the CFO will say, yeah, but the spreadsheets are fine. Maybe stay on the spreadsheets. And so what we worked out was that actually, in order to get to that ICP, we had to be able to offer them a slightly different flavor of the product, something that was more pre-configured, easier to adopt, quicker to onboard, and really leverage some of the partners we've got in the market. And so, yeah, the ICP is interesting because at one level, it's anyone who lends or extends credit. At another level, tier one banks, whilst they could use our products, are very difficult to sell to and take a long time. So if you think about, how well does your product fit for that client, how quickly can that client move, all of those sorts of different factors, you start to come back to sort of mid-tier, tier 2, tier 3 challengers, and organizations who are probably already on that. They've made a change in terms of some of their tech, which means they're looking for modern technology to put into that stack.
Got it. So you've effectively looked at who your core ICP are and then addressed that with the product as well. So you've got your kind of main products that are for the enterprise, and then you've kind of taken a bit more of a lighter version for people that need a bit more hand-holding before they get into, needing the all singing, all dancing, so to speak.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah, often the line tends to be integration. So the line
Mm.
is often around, real-time integration is great, and it's our favorite thing to do, and it's where we push, the big end of our client base. Um, but if you've only got 1,000 customers in arrears, you don't necessarily need to embark on a expensive, real-time integration project, because actually you might take a different route. And so, yeah, we really, adopted the strategy that it's a one product business. We used to have lots of different product names. We took the decision, to actually scrap all of the product names. And it is Flexys. That's what we sell, and that is the product. And so we can really just serve all sizes of organizations from the same product, by really carving up the offering that we provide to them. But equally, you can grow with it because you don't need to, go out and buy another product or have another upgrade down the line. So yeah, scalability was a key at a business level, but also at the product level. That was another really important factor of our growth plan.
Interesting. And you mentioned about getting rid of your product names. I think that's quite a bold move. Often people like to name things, especially in the beginning. And sometimes those names stick, and they kind of carry on. So that product effectively, carries on further than the company name through any acquisition or whatever. But with you guys, you want to focus on people remembering the brand and simplifying what it is you're offering by connecting the two, which I definitely think is a bold thing to do when you've already tried to start kind of pushing your product name. Walk me through the process that you guys went through to make that change.
Yeah, so it's an interesting journey. I think particularly, from a marketing perspective. So, way back when we had different components of the product that had different names, and our teams would go out and implement and deliver our product to our clients, and they would say the product is called, X, and then the client would be like, oh yeah, we're going to give it a name internally as well, and then they would give it another name. And then the team who worked on that project with that client would start talking about the product with that name. And then another client would come along and go, oh, yeah, I really like that. We're going to call it this. And so really quickly, you sort of stand back and you go, someone says Control Plus, someone says Collect Plus, someone says Evolve, someone says something else. And then you realize that you started, I guess, with best intentions, but you've you've sort of diluted actually that attachment of the thing that someone has away from the business, because suddenly it's their thing. So you buy Microsoft Word, no one's going to name their Microsoft Word product. I mean, maybe someone has, right? But I mean,
Unlikely.
this, right? Um, and it's interesting. I mean, I look at, other organizations, if you look at organizations like Ledgy, in terms of like cap table, SaaS cap table software, the products, what do we use? Oh, we use Ledgy for it. It's little things like that where the thing you're saying is the name of the company. And I guess the comment about brand is interesting because there's it's your sort of area of specialism, but there's that really interesting thing about, when you are a day one company, the amount of money you probably should spend on brand is, very, very small, right? When you're a PLC, all the marketing money you ever spend in the world is basically on your brand. But the thing is that what do you want at the end of it? I want our clients to talk to other people in the sector and say, we use Flexys and Flexys is great, because then they go, oh, I should go and look up Flexys, right? If they say I use, I don't know, X product name, that attachment won't exist on the internet, probably not to us potentially. I mean, it might be what they call it, and then they might find another. They might find a competitor. Who knows? So we were in a place, I think, where if we go back to that comment about the journey and why John and Brian, when they founded the business, had the vision they had for it around the technology, that was a great point in time thing to do for Flexys to differentiate us from competitors in the market and some of the largest PLC businesses there are out there. The thing is that ultimately, as you go along, technology is not really a USP. It's not really a thing to market. It's great for IT teams, but from a business user perspective, it doesn't really mean anything. It's a cloud native, real time event streaming. I don't know what any of those things mean. Like, what does it do to me as a user? What does it do to the business? And I mean, one of the biggest things we did, I mean, I'd worked with a guy who in a marketing team before, who'd basically done every role in marketing, everything from product marketing to brand to content to, design, everything. And so I was really like, look, we really need to bring this person in. And came in, having not been in our sector. And I just said, look, I really don't like the value proposition at all. And we'd done some work and we'd looked at it and we'd spoken to investors, and everyone gives you their opinion. Oh, I think you should have a 2-product strategy. Okay. I think you should cut your customers in half and say this half have this product and this half have this product. And I think you should do this with pricing. And I think you should do this with naming. And very quickly you realize that, particularly when you lean on technology for your messaging, the naming is out of date so fast. So, we used to talk a lot about digital. I mean, the current generation, everything's digital. There is no analog. So it's all digital, right? So like, you're going to have a digital experience. I don't know what that means. Like, is that just on my phone like everything else? I mean, so you very quickly realize that it's talking about digital self-service. Well, what is digital? Do you mean just like something on my phone? Is that what you're talking about? And even the change of things like with apps, like people who had, very heavy app-led strategies for a long time, and now they don't, they just use, responsive web pages. So I said to David, look, I really want you to go away and actually think about why, what do we sell? Who do we sell it to? And why do they buy it? And what are they looking for? And then come back and let's have a chat and tell me what you think. And also look at our current branding and look at the way we present ourselves in the market. And came back and said, look, I think this is what we should do, and presented something that really was completely different, really, really stripped back. We just focused on the value proposition of collect more faster, because we were like, that's actually what our customers want to do. That's what they're buying the product for, because really they want to collect more money than they are doing today, and they want to do it faster than they're doing it because it has a big business impact. And we really decided to change and make everything as benefit-led as we could. We took the product we have, we broke it down into 4 pillars. So we looked at customer outcomes, we looked at efficiency, we looked at risk and compliance, and we looked at collect more as a strategy. And then we started to take the roadmap and chunk it up into those things. And once we'd done some work around the value proposition, then I said to David, look, I'd like you to go away and just redo the website, but I don't want you to do it with anybody in the business. So I want you to go.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
bold.
I mean, you can imagine as a marketeer, like, you know, I think you probably gave him some.
That's my baby.
So I think it was also the thing of like, is it right? Like, am I doing something that's right? You know, what's going to happen? And I was like, you know, I think there's a point where you realize that our target market aren't our team. Like, we're not selling to them. Like, you know, we are selling to these other organizations that are out there in the world. And so we need to be able to present a shop window that they look at and it resonates with them. And it, you know, that's the call to action. And so, yeah, we went away and let's say, you know, David built up a new website, completely new messaging, and presented it to the business when it was finished. Which was, you know, I think, you know, it's an interesting strategy. I would definitely do it again because I think sometimes that you know, you can design great things by committee, but also it can be an absolute nightmare, you know, because suddenly you get bits of everyone's view. And I think that that's where the website had got to be honest with you. I think after 6 years, the website had been through so many different iterations of, you know, one sales leader wanted to put this on the front of it, someone else wanted to put a cog on the front of it, you know, and so you end up at the end of it, you go, why do we have this? And you go, I don't know. I mean, it's just the sum of 6 years work. So yeah, that was a big thing, and that was a real focus for us. And then from that, we started to think about names. You know, do we need a name? Do we really have to have a name? What do we want people to think about when they think about our product? We want them to think about the benefits, and then what do we want to think about? We want them to think about Flexys. So, you know, today we don't have more than one product out there in the market. So, you know, there we go. It is Flexys. That's what people buy and use.
Mm, that's quite a journey. How long did that all take, sort of end to end?
So just under a year.
Okay.
Yeah. So from last January to the website was pretty much October, November. But we went out, like, by the summer, we'd sort of decided that collect more faster was something that we would hang our hat on. And so that was already something we started to use when we were talking to people and when we were out there. Um, and yeah, I think also we wanted to build something with a view that you needed something that you could also adapt and change as you move forward, you know, and I think it's really hard. I mean, most organizations probably don't have that opportunity to have a single person come in and either refresh or completely own like a marketing strategy. But it was really important, I guess, for me that, you know, you get someone in who can do that and then let them go and do it, rather than tell them, oh, I like what you've done, but I do think you should, I do think you should do all of this to it, and then water it down. So yeah, I think we were really happy with where we got to, and then there was the big, you know, I guess the big thing we ended up with then was going, so how do we validate this is right?
Mm,
Like, are people going to buy stuff from us? And like, you know, are we going to
yeah.
clients who go, oh my God, we loved the messaging. You know, the messaging was what you know, was what did it for us. And it's really interesting. I think we've probably come to a position whereby a combination of the messaging and the positioning and the product side, all of those different layers of evolution have probably led to, you know, where we are now in terms of some of the new clients that we've signed in the last few months, particularly ones who are in that space of challengers who are scaling as well, which is a really interesting client base for us.
So you guys went through that project round about what, year 7, year 8 of the business?
Yeah.
Because you're coming up to 10 years, aren't you? Next year will be your 10-year anniversary.
Yeah, the very end of next year. Yeah.
Yeah. So to do that, I think it's really interesting, but I'd love to take a couple of those tips as to what you guys did to help earlier startups figure out the kind of quicker way of doing that. Nobody has a year when you're kind of starting out. But to kind of almost shortcut that so that they can get the benefits sooner, what would be the kind of suggestions that you would give to startups when they're building their product and deciding on the portfolio, thinking about how to name, how to present the messaging, that kind of thing?
So I think that it's two things. One is, I guess, so actually, Rodrigo said something on this, which I really liked on your podcast, which was like, don't fall in love with it. Like, don't become obsessed by it, right? Like, you're going to create something that at some point you probably are going to throw away and start again. Like, and I don't mean from a product perspective, hopefully not, but I mean from a brand and an imaging and a logo. I mean, because in day one, you're going to be like, really quickly, we need to get a website up. We need to be able to put some stuff on it. And you're probably going to be, unless your co-founder is a great marketeer, you're probably going to have like a sales guy and a tech guy. And then between you, someone's going to create quite a technical logo. Someone's going to create a very salesy logo, and you're going to meet in the middle somewhere. And it's funny. Sometimes when I'm, say when I'm bored, but every now and then I sort of go back on Slack, like to the beginning of time. I got a wormhole over Christmas doing it actually, and reading like the general channel from day one. And that is fascinating because I saw all the conversations about brand development and names and what they were going to do. And yeah, I love that because I think it's part of your story. Like, none of that's ever wrong. It's where you started, right? Everything, all of those things are some of the parts that you have today. So yeah, I would think just always know that at some point you're probably going to pivot and change it and refresh it. And also, at some point you're going to hire someone who's going to come in, who's going to go, I want to take some ownership over this and do my thing with it. And I guess at that point you've got to be willing to give it up and let them do it. The other thing is probably the externalizing of things. So I think it's really easy in the early days with anything that you, as a team, internalize everything you're doing. So what do we think is the best thing to do for this? What do we think is the best thing to do here? What do we think is the best thing to have on this page? Or, how are we going to do this thing? Okay, right, we're going to do it like this. I mean, everyone talks about it and it's so true, but unless you talk to your market and your clients and your prospects about what they need and what their outcomes are, you really are just building something that you want and you like, and that may have zero saleable value, right? So it might be that you sit down with a prospect who's just like you and goes, "Oh wow, I love that." But I think that you need to externalize as much as you can all the time. And so, you know, we talk to our clients, whether it be from a service perspective, from a professional services perspective, from an account management perspective, all the time. But equally, we'll run 2 community days a year, and we had a long discussion about whether we were running user groups or what were we doing. We ended up settling on running what we call community days, which is, where we show the product and the roadmap and everything else. But we also do educational stuff for our clients. So we bring in partners who are just really specialist at a particular thing that our clients, is a pain point they have. And that allows us to really have the conversations about, so what do you think about if we built this? Like, is that useful? Like, we think this is the value. Is that the value for you? We did an AI roundtable yesterday, actually, because I think a lot of the businesses you have on here and a lot of the people maybe who listen they'll be pressured, they have to have an AI strategy, right? Their product has to have probably a .ai web address, right? Okay, why? Is it because that's the market and that's what you're doing and that's your sort of key point that you're selling? Or is it that your investors think you should have it, or, you think you should have it? And so we got a small group of our clients and actually some of our prospects together yesterday, just in a behind closed door setting, and just went, like, what are you doing today? What are you thinking of doing? What's the biggest barrier? Why wouldn't you do it? If we did X, is that a good thing? If we did Y, is that a good thing? Almost to get a little bit behind the hype of the conversation and the external image that everyone has to present. And those conversations for me are so valuable. And if you can take those into your branding and your messaging, when you sign a client, I always think if you win a client or lose a deal, the worst person in the world to do the close lost or the close won conversation is the salesperson, right? Because if it's close lost, it's never going to be a sales problem, right?
No.
If it's close won, they're so happy that it's close won, they're probably going to cost them a lot, right? They're just going to talk about how good it is. And so, we've talked recently about actually we're going to get our marketing team to run those with clients or prospects. And the question for me is always like, why did you buy it? Like, what was it? Like, what brought you to us originally? Like, what do you think of the messaging? Like, was it the product? Was it the outcomes? Like, what was the thing? Was it a technical thing that you really liked? Because if you understand why people are either choosing you or not choosing you, then I think it gives you the best opportunity to shape how you can win more business in the future.
You're definitely speaking my language, so I appreciate all of that. I want to take you back to this change. You come into the business, you're hired as the COO. There's probably a bunch of people that were in the business from day one to sort of day 50 and thereon. And then there's a regime change, so to speak, and you're kind of put in that position of leading the business when the CEO steps back and leaves the business. How did you handle that shift, that massive change from a human perspective? And I'm also interested as a kind of secondary. You mentioned PLC, you've come from big companies. That transition for you personally, coming into that smaller business. I know you've kind of done it in the past before, but I'd love to kind of hear how you dealt with that change and how you made that kind of transition from that PLC into this small business world.
Yeah. So, I mean, go with the sort of the change and what that looked like initially. So I think we're really lucky as an organization that actually across the whole business today, there's still such a large number of people here who are, day one, day two, day three, first few months, which is great. I mean, for me, that's the sort of validation that, we don't get it right all the time, but we get it right maybe more times than we get it wrong, because people want to stay and be part of the journey. When you make the change, I guess the thing is in the early days, the founding team, are the sort of visionaries, product sales, strategy, everything else. And sometimes in the early days, depending on whether you're completely bootstrapped or whether you're, investor backed, you've probably got more money to spend earlier sometimes. So sometimes you do more things like, you might have a table tennis table or whatever it might be, right? Some of those things that people do because you're creating a different culture. And then, one of the things that was really key for me was that we had to become more of a business. Like, that was the sort of focus was, there was a big drive in terms of, getting the business profitable and revenue generating and everything else and just cash generative. And so, that means that there are different things you have to think about in terms of, well, actually, is that a good use of money? Should we do that? Should we not do it? Should we do less of this? We should focus more on things we're doing with clients and, therefore we can't do all of these things. And sometimes, you have to make some pretty tactical decisions from that perspective. And obviously, coming in, in that CEO non-founder role, then it's really easy that, I'm the bad guy, right? Because I'm doing it. So, I think you have to just sometimes just accept that's the way it is. It's the easiest thing in the world to be like, oh, it wasn't like this before. Okay, fine. I can't do anything about that. I've got something I want to do, and this is the strategy, right? And I probably took the approach of having more of a granular strategy in terms of we had a very numerical based, we have this many clients today in 4 years, I want us to be here. And the reason why we did it in quite a sort of numerical, tangible way in terms of client numbers was because one, it was something that people could look at and feel was attainable, albeit was a stretch, right? In terms of it's a pretty big goal. The other thing is that in order to acquire more clients and scale the business, everything you need to do is the things that you would set out in a strategy to grow a business. So, you need to think about your go-to-market function. You need to think about your product function. You need to think about how you can, do you have a scalable version of the product, which is more onboarding, less project? You can therefore sign more logos. You can play around with the commercials a bit more. You need to do things with partner programs. You need to do things with collateral. You need to write stuff down. We need to grow every part of the business and mature it and make it more repeatable. And really, that's what sort of every business strategy I've sort of ever seen looks like, right? Is sort of go through every part of the business and how do you make it more scalable and repeatable? But the thing is then how do you measure it? Because efficiency is really hard to measure. Output's really hard to measure, unless it's just a sales thing. So then you come back to say, okay, well, maybe we make it quite a tangible thing. But then the hard thing is that sometimes you have to pivot and you go, okay, right, well, we can't spend that money today. We're going to have to pull that back a little bit. And so therefore, okay, if you take money out of the marketing budget, then you sort of have to accept that you're stacking up a problem for next financial year, right? You make a saving this year, it's not great for next year. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I guess we ultimately, you sort of end up being measured on it either works or it doesn't work. And you explain to the team why you're doing things. There's certain things you probably don't run through, on a very granular basis with the team. But I think you have to talk to them about why you want to do it and where you're going to get to. And the fact that also, we don't want Flexys just to become a cookie cutter PLC business, right? Like, part of the reason why people like working here is because we do interesting stuff and we do it in a way that, we're a 100% remote business effectively. And, we really major on meeting up and teams meeting up whenever they can. But the reality is that, I see things about, well, we had to move to 100% remote, other businesses. And then that was, the whole business failed. And it's like, well, for me, it's a little bit around how you manage it. It's a different thing. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I guess the further you move away from that point, the change, the easier it becomes sometimes. Because, you're not, you hire more people and you're not always the bad guy. I think some people start to see why decisions are made in a certain way. I think joining and that part of it, so joining from a PLC into, or anybody who joins from a large business into a startup and a scale up, I mean, for me, I know I hadn't done that before, and so I didn't ask any of the things that I would ask now. And I think it's just a completely different world. I think the business I was working in and Flexys are not the same things at all. Joining, being really used to, P&Ls and, specific ways of operating and what we were going to do and, a global team. So differences in hiring in building teams in Malaysia and APAC versus, what we were doing in the UK and having 4 product sets across 4 completely different types of products. And then, coming into an environment where you go, right, well, this is cash flow. This is the team. This is what we're going to do. This is what our investors are willing to do. How are we going to achieve X with what we have today? And everything is closer. Like, everybody who works in the business, when you get together, you can just go, you're basically like a secondary school class, right? There's 30 of you or whatever, right? I mean, sometimes you feel like, why are we so bad at communicating when there's so few of us? And it's sometimes it's that, and it's just a completely different way of thinking, and it's a real. I think it probably took me, my first couple of months, I was like, wow, this is so extremely different. I don't know if I'm prepared, even mentally ready for what this is like, because it's such a roller coaster journey all the time, and it's can be very emotionally draining, I guess. And you really carry that, as a team, we carry that on behalf of our whole team. And so when we've hired anybody senior, the thing for me is always like, have you worked at a company at this stage, at this point? What have you done? What do you want to do? If you're interviewing for Flexys and you're interviewing for Salesforce, then it's not right. like, it's not the right, like, these two things are polar opposite, mutually exclusive types of businesses. If you want that big, comfortable, sort of PLC world, then that is a different thing. And some people, want that, and some days I probably think, oh, it'd be nice, wouldn't it, just to have that and not think about some other things. But then all the excitement, and all the stuff you can do, like, could we sell a deal today in South Africa, right, or in Africa? Like, yeah. I mean, we've got some things that we're doing at the moment, and how do we make those decisions? Well, we sort of, 3 or 4 of us sit down and go, okay, so how do we do it? Like, what things do we need to think about? That's our FC's bag. You can go away and work that one out. From a product perspective, Brian, are you happy? Like, can we do this? From a risk perspective and a scalability perspective, is it the right thing? Can we do it? Yeah, everyone happy? Right, brilliant. Right, let's do it. So, that decision-making process, everything is fast. And I think that's the thing for me. Things do move really quickly. Sometimes, the highs are always really high and the lows are always really low. That is something that probably other founders, other people in, senior teams in startups and scale-ups probably resonates with them. It's the stuff we always talk about when we're together is, God, how did you manage with that? So that's an interesting thing for me.
Brilliant. So wrapping up, for those people that are listening to the podcast and are, building their startup, their early stage, you've obviously you're much further along as an organization, but you've seen so much and you've come in from that massive organization where everything is being done perfectly and, there's a lot of people to do it, a lot more budget to do things. What would your advice be to those businesses that are just starting out, those CEOs that are just kind of getting going? What would you share?
So I think that it's probably always important to have, you need, I guess as a team, you need to always have one eye on what are you doing for your team. Ultimately, if you don't have anybody in the team, you don't have a business, right? You can't do anything. So, why did you do it? What did you want to do? Yeah, some of those things will change over time, but I guess the other part is then, so what are we trying to do for our clients and our prospects, and where we're trying to be? And I think being able to communicate that stuff, however you do it, I think probably in the early days when there's one, two, three, four, one is slightly different, but a handful of you, right, in a room together, talk about everything all the time, right? One of you's going to have to do payroll, someone's going to have to do something else. You're not going to have, you're not going to sit down on day one and think we should really write how can we write a paternity and a maternity policy, which are, the sort of policy we would want as an organization, because you're just going to go, oh my God, someone's having a baby. We better try and work out what we do, right? So, there's things like that. And then I guess as you get bigger and depends on whether you're hybrid, you're fully, fully in person, you're fully remote, how do you keep communicating stuff to the team? And how do you make sure that, I guess at a level, everyone knows where you want to be? So how can people contribute to that thing? And I always think it's really hard. If you say to people, right, next year, we want to do another 2 million of ARR. Most people would probably think, I have no idea how I can contribute to do it. Like, unless you're the sales team. I mean, hopefully the sales team don't think that. But I mean, the rest of the business probably think, well, I don't know what that means. And then you realize that actually nearly everybody in a business of our size has a touch point with a client all the time. Could be the ops guys who are managing the cloud environments, could be the support team, could be the PS team, could be the sales, could be anybody. And so, you start to realize that everyone has an influence on some of these things, but you need to break it down into a way that probably people know how they can contribute to that goal. And you need the right goals, like whether it's a North Star thing, whether it's a metric, a bit like people who, any of the parents out there, right? When you have a baby, everyone will tell you that they know best on how to look after it. Everyone with a child has probably experienced this. So bear that in mind for every accelerator that you go to or group that everyone will tell you how to do the thing that you're doing. And, sometimes that advice is amazing, but a lot of the time it's not in the context of your situation. Like the thing you are experiencing that day may not be, that might be the right advice, and it is the thing you should definitely do, but it may not be the thing you can do. And that's a really hard thing, because you might have to do something else knowing it's the wrong thing. I'm making a tactical decision rather than that strategic decision, which is right. And I guess that's the communication thing. How do you tell people about that? What can you tell people? How do you communicate that? So yeah, find a group. Maybe it's, like you say, other founders, other people running businesses, other people a similar stage. Talk to them, I think, about how they're managing. And I think it probably has to be businesses of the same size. I mean, everyone's listened to founders of their second unicorn, and they tell you things like never accept VC money. And you go, yeah, but you exited the last one for 80 million. Like, you took 80 million out of it. So the second time, isn't it? To say don't take, they're like, yeah, I mean, it's different context, right? And so their problem around culture and communication and where people are based in the world, it's not necessarily going to be it's not going to be a context that a business with 5 people has, right? And so there's useful things, and then there are things that aren't useful. And so, I think you have to find your own way with things. But yeah, having a group around you, people you can talk to and peers that you can lean on, and yeah, look after your team, I guess, is the other big one.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much, James. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Thanks for being on the podcast.
No problem. Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thanks, Natalie.
That's it for this episode of Tech Startup Stories. Have a story you'd like us to share, or a topic you'd want to cover? Reach out and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.